Hello, and welcome to Spotlight On, the podcast that brings together business leaders, entrepreneurs, and experts covering a range of topics. I'm Nicholas Barton, founder and CEO of the Barton Partnership. We're an award-winning executive recruitment and consulting solutions firm providing permanent search and independent consulting services across strategy, sustainability and M&A, data and analytics, and transformation and change.
Today, we're talking to Dave Allen, founder of Brandpie. Dave founded Brandpie in late 2008. They're an independent consultancy specialising in purpose-driven transformation. From a client point of view, they work with complex multinational corporations, fast-growing entrepreneurs, leading NGOs across healthcare, pharma, technology, financial services, consulting, professional services, energy, automotive, aerospace, and engineering. Brandpie was named as one of the Financial Times leading management consultancies, and they have achieved that every year since 2018. And they were B2B Agency of the Year in North America by Drum in 2019. Dave himself is married with 4 children. He's a keen gardener and grows his own vegetables. He enjoys windsurfing, cycling, and is a passionate photographer. During COVID, like many, he took up making bread and is now a big fan of the world of sourdough. So he's going to have some tips around that. Dave, thanks for joining us today. Great to see you. We've talked about doing this for a while, so I'm pleased we've got some time in the diary. Fantastic career. Let's start at the beginning. Can you start by sharing a bit about your career journey and what led you to establish Brandpie?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for inviting me to participate. Yeah, I started Brandpie back in 2009, and it was really because I wanted to go back to consulting. I'd had a great career, started life at Kodak, did their sort of management training, and eventually joined a small design company that I used to use at Kodak called Samson Tyrrell. And in 85, 86, we were approached by Martin Sorrell, who was at that time building WPP up and really just getting it going. And I think we were the 9th acquisition WPP made.
Right.
And so we joined WPP, we did our earnout, and then WPP breached its banking covenants just as we were finishing our earnout. So that created an exciting moment for us all. Who owned the company? Us, WPP. Anyway, it all got resolved. WPP sorted out the debt situation with the banks. We got paid, and I then stayed and worked with Martin till 2008. So from 86 to 2008, it was a fantastic sort of time. But WPP in that period got, as everybody knows, very large. And
you were the 9th business.
I think we were the 9th acquisition. Martin was buying quite a few businesses in those early days, and very quickly got to 20 companies. But I think we were the 9th acquisition that WPP made. And in those days, nobody had really heard of Martin. What he achieved at WPP was amazing. In the 90s, we were very much sort of driven to become the biggest. It was really exciting. The acquisitions of JWT, Ogilvy and Mather, Young and Rubicam, Gray, all of those just created this phenomenal sort of environment where just everything was about growth. It felt like you were in an incredibly successful organization. Everybody was meeting new people. It was just a fantastic environment. And I got the sort of privilege of building what a business called Enterprise IG. So that was bringing together 5 WPP companies, and a period of time you learn that getting alignment across different business owners is not easy. Yeah. And then we made several acquisitions. We got that up to in excess of $100 million turnover. And it was really the first global brand consultancy. And the idea was a really simple one. In the 90s, brands were globalizing, and there was no business where you could actually create and take account of local culture, local identities. And so we had a network with real companies in real markets. A lot of the other people who had global networks simply had sales offices. So we were really the first with creative boots on the ground. And that was hugely successful business. And then back in 2002, I sort of had a cancer scare. And that really just changes how you think about life. And about everything. And I really sort of decided at that point I didn't want to carry on doing quarter by quarter reporting, really not enjoying the business of running a big business, and really enjoy sort of the consulting side of the business. And I'd done some great work with John Brown at BP back in the late 90s, really loved that. So decided to get sort of back on the client side, and Martin sort of managed to, at that time, WPP was getting sort of asked by its largest clients. You've really got to sort of sort out the coordination of the operating companies.
Yeah.
And some of WPP's largest clients might have 30 plus WPP businesses working for it. And in those days, there was no coordination really. And so myself and a couple of others for Ford, BP and Vodafone, I took on Vodafone. We got the task of trying to put in place some form of coordination across all of the companies that were working for those businesses. And so I think I had over 43 companies for Vodafone, and, you know, with a revenue of around 90 million euros, something of that sort of magnitude at that time. And it was just like trying to herd cats. You know, there was no incentive for them to work together. You know, we brought them together. We created a sort of team structure and tried to run it a bit like a business. And we brought more coordination to bear. It started to work. And I think now there are something like 50 or 60 WPP companies, maybe more, that have that sort of team structure, team leader in place. Yeah, and Omnicom into public, people like that have copied the model. It's a tough thing to do, though, because all of your businesses are incentivized by their P&L, and yet you've got to create some sort of model that enables them to be incentivized to work together. And it's easier in an up market than it is in a down market, because obviously everybody reverts to type and starts protecting their P&L in a down market. So I think that sort of model, where you really are sort of, you know, trying to provide an integrating service, it sounds great on paper, but it's tough to do, you know, really tough to do. And so by 2006, 2007, I'd sort of come to the conclusion I wanted to really get back to, you know, what I really love doing, which is working with CEOs and helping them really think through, okay, what's going to be the idea that drives my business, inspires my people, and helps my business to sort of reach its full potential. And that's what I used to do in the 90s. So we launched Brandpie back in, I think it was December 2008. So we're just coming up for 15 years old now.
It's amazing. Congratulations.
And yeah, no, thank you. And you never know when you're starting a business, you sort of, am I trading off, you know, other people's previous sort of successes? Am I any good? So, you know, you start on day one, yeah, in total fear. You know, I've given up a really good job at WPP. I'm sure my wife and family are thinking, what the hell is he doing? And you go from a good, stable lifestyle to zero.
Yeah.
And you're sat there, you know, you've done it, you know what it feels like. And you wait for the phone to ring. You tell some friends you're setting up in business. What was interesting, you know, when I was in the process of planning it, I decided I wanted to do it with somebody, not just do it on my own. And I must have had about 20 people throughout the course of my career say to me, yeah, if you ever start a business, I'll do it with you. And I spoke to most of those 20 people, and they all disappeared. And I was talking to one of my sort of ex-clients who'd become a friend, Roger Partington. They were up staying with us in Albury, and I was telling him this story that all these people disappeared. And he said, oh, I'll do it with you. And he was the person I would have least expected to do it. And he was marketing director of Safeway, and he'd been marketing director of Roundtree's. I think he did the Blue Smartie, which is one of his claims to fame. And he was one of the top marketeers in the UK. I'd worked with him on several of his sort of assignments. He'd been CEO of Texas Utilities in Europe. And so he said, oh, I'll do it with you. And so off we go. And, you know, we started the business. He talked to some of his friends, told him what he was doing. And within sort of a few weeks, we got 2 or 3 clients into the business. And suddenly you go from, will we get any work, to how are we going to do all of this work? We were very fortunate that one of my Vodafone clients, Paul Donovan, he left Vodafone and got the group CEO role at Aircom. And that required an awful lot of help, heavily unionized business, bought and sold 5 times, indebted. You can imagine sort of levels of employee morale. So, we started working with Paul in April 2009. We also sort of got a big program from KPMG to help them think through, what their role, why they exist. And both of those went really well. And I should have known better, but the one thing I really didn't put in place was a new business pipeline machine. And if anybody should know that, I should know that. And so we came to, I think it was September 2011, having done over £1 million turnover in our first year, approaching 1.5 million, 2 million in our second year. So an amazing start. And then it suddenly stopped. And because both KPMG and Aircom finished, it was a natural conclusion to the project. And they both finished around September 2011. And so you look at the business and go, oh, we could be broke in 3 months, and we've saved a bit of money. How are we going to get through it? And we scrapped and scraped, and we managed to find 2 or 3 clients. And then we had our sort of really big break was when Mark Weinberger took over as CEO of EY, and they wanted some help to sort of frame what became Vision 2020. So, Mark's sort of core expression of and we showed them our model, and in that sort of intervening period, we developed a very simple model: purpose, ambition, strategy. And really just trying to address a lot of the confusion I've seen within executive leadership teams and boards around vision, mission, purpose, values, objectives, goals. So we tried to develop something that used labels that put some clear space and didn't sound like the same thing. And so the vision framework we sort of talk about is, what is your purpose? Why do you exist? What's your role in the world? How does that, connect what you do to what society needs? What's your ambition? What are you trying to achieve? Not just your financial ambition, but, are you trying to create a best place to work? Are you trying to build a strong brand? So we help companies sort of frame their ambitions in different ways. And then how are you going to get there? A distillation of the business strategy. And if you can get all of that on effectively a postcard, what I've found is that people really understand it. If it's complicated and 28 slides and they don't get it, you've got to make it ultra simple. And one of our core skills is taking all of these complex inputs and making it incredibly simple. So, listening to Mark and working with Mark, I spent a day with him in Washington in July 2012. We then sort of worked with his sort of newly forming leadership team. And EY have this very good handover period where the previous CEO winds down and the new CEO gets time to build and plan their strategy. So the handover's done really elegantly. So we worked with Mark, help him sort of push the thinking, and we developed and supported them developing the idea of building a better working world as their purpose. They then sort of set about their ambition and framing that. And I think he framed that as a 50 billion objective with the strongest professional services brand. And then they distilled their strategy down to some very simple points. And all of that sort of got framed and launched. And at the same time, they decided to change from Ernst & Young to EY. So we supported them on that journey, and we've worked with them for nearly a decade now. And really proud of what they've achieved, and an amazing sort of journey that they've been on, and it's just been a privilege to work with them and watch that. And our business grew. I went over to the States in 2016 to support Mary Lee. She was acting as our sort of consultant business generator in the States, and so my wife and I went over and spent 3 years in New York building that business, and we got that up to a good size, and so came back. Mary Lee and Rick was the creative director of RAP, Colin. So he sort of brings a ton of communication, advertising, conceptual thinking to the business. So they run the business in the States, came back and carried on building the business in the UK. And then we acquired a small web agency, Owl and Giraffe, that's now sort of Brandpie Digital.
Right.
And that enabled us to create, I think, a fully integrated offer. So we now provide our clients with purpose consulting, brands consulting, culture and employee engagement, web and communication content creation. So we can do what we call a full-blown purpose transformation program. We've done several of those now. They can take anything from sort of 9 months to 18 months, but also clients come in and just say, we want to use the brand identity practice, or we just want to use the culture practice, or we just want a new website. So we can do it in small bite-sized chunks, or we can do the whole purpose-driven transformation.
An amazing story. And quickly, I just wanted to touch upon your time with Sir Martin quickly, and just, I guess, understand, what experiences you got from Martin, and, what was it like to actually work with him, and what impact did it have on your career and your experience of running a business?
I don't think I've ever worked with anybody like Martin. I've worked with some great CEOs over my career on the client side, but Martin is truly remarkable, and I love him dearly. And it was great fun working with him right from the outset. I'm almost sure he's got a photographic memory, because I've never known anybody be able to remember people's names like he can.
Wow.
And he'd come into our business and he'd just remember just about everybody's name. And, there might be 50 people that he would meet, and he just had this incredible ability. Certainly the hardest working guy, he seemed to start at 7 and finish at midnight. And if you were in New York and he was in New York, you get a phone call at like 4 a.m. and
Really?
just a bit bored, fancy a chat. And it was, he is a remarkable human being. And I thought I was driven, but when you see somebody who is genuinely so driven and so driven by what he wants to achieve, you just go, okay, well, that is not a normal mortal.
But did you buy into it? Did you find yourself gravitating to that and buying into him as a result of his attitude and his approach?
Oh yeah. You can't not, because it's sort of addictive, and particularly in the 90s, when the business was growing, every month there was something exciting happened. It was just 1990s, that decade just disappeared. It was so fast and so exciting, and working alongside Martin, sort of meeting people with him, deputizing for him. He put me on the board of Chime Communications, so I did that for sort of 6 years, working with Tim Bell and some of the great and good of the public relations industry. So you just got an amazing sort of breadth of experiences working alongside Martin, and you just never knew where you were going to sort of go next. And you get a call and, oh, could you pick this up for me? I've got this charity for the World Health Organization, they need some help. And you suddenly find you're in a chateau in Luxembourg with Prince Henri and Michael Douglas and Frida from ABBA, and it was just crazy. So
I'm sure
it was just a brilliant time. And no, I haven't spoken to him for a while, and
he's on his new venture, isn't he? And his new build out.
Yeah, and that's having its challenges. It started off well, and it's now having its challenges, and so I'm sure if anybody can fix them, Martin can, for sure. And it sort of, it inculcates a sort of attitude, and you learn a lot about yourself, because you figure out, do I want to live like that? And do I want to do 7 till 11 every day? And is that what it takes to build a big business? So, I didn't. I wanted more balance in my life, and I wanted to have more time with sort of family, friends, and things like that. And so, I chose to leave sort of WPP probably in 2004, and was persuaded to stay until 2008 through doing the Vodafone job.
Yeah.
But setting up my own company, best thing I ever did, for sure. you for the first time in your life, you actually feel in control.
Yeah.
And Martin was so good, I guess, at sort of showing you how to run a business. You start to put in place disciplines in your own company that you don't actually need to do. Now, some of them are very good. So quarter by quarter reporting, or, managing all of the ratios that WPP sort of trained you to manage to make sure you were running an efficient business. You suddenly go like, why am I doing that? I don't need to do that. This is a business I understand. I don't need to run it in the same sort of way. So it took me quite a while, I think, to shed the WPP mindset, which, is a powerful mindset, but isn't necessarily for everybody. Once I realized I was in control of my own destiny, then you suddenly go, okay, well, every decision I take, I have to live with. And that really is quite liberating. And I just love that now. And, I would never go back to working for somebody. It would just be too hard, definitely too hard.
And I think one of the most impressive things is that with all of this, you've managed to keep your hair as well, by the way, as a fellow business owner. I haven't quite achieved that, but despite all the challenges and the stress, you've kept your hair, which is
I think that's more genetic. My 97-year-old dad's still got all of his hair as well.
That's quite amazing. Right, so let's talk about Brandpie. Let's talk about the work that you do, because it really is quite distinct, and it genuinely has, and you can see that an impact with the clients that you've been working with. Let's start with talking about corporate purpose. Let's talk about employee engagement, which is a significant factor in driving corporate purpose. How can businesses effectively engage their workforce to become champions of purpose and contribute towards its realization?
I think it's a really simple but hard thing to do. If you think about yourself, what excites you, what gets you out of bed in the morning, every day you've got to be motivated to go to work. And if you can create an environment inside your company where everybody who comes to work for you is excited, is motivated, is inspired to do their best, then you're going to get higher levels of engagement, you're going to get higher levels of effort, you're going to get all of the things that people strive for. People work for years to build cultures where people are motivated and inspired. It's not an easy thing to do. We entered the Best Companies Awards for the first time as a company in 2023, and I hadn't really thought about it. I'm a bit suspicious of awards and tend to sort of poo-poo them, but I was persuaded by my head of HR to sort of do it. And we suddenly found ourselves, we've got like 3-star status, we've got world class, we're number 2 in our industry in terms of levels of engagement. And so I went along to the event and talked to some of the other CEOs who were there, shared how we go about it and how we do it. And a lot of businesses still try to control. The balance between trust and control is something you've got to think really carefully about. And the one thing I do with all of my team is trust them, let them find out for themselves what works, what doesn't work. And the more you trust them and the less you try to control them, the more inspired, I think, and more engaged they are. And then you've also got to sort of factor in, am I doing something good? Am I doing something useful? Am I contributing to society? Human beings as a species like to make progress. And if you feel you are helping your company to progress, if you feel that you're helping your company to employ more people, train people better, all of those things will build that culture that genuinely sort of gets you that discretionary effort. And that's what you're really looking for. There's a clear correlation. There's plenty of studies out there that show clear correlation between the more engaged your workforce, the more profitable you're likely to be. And, the greater sort of value you will create, the more jobs you'll create, the happier your workforce will be.
It's interesting you say that, because the Brandpie CEO purpose report highlights that whilst many organizations incorporate purpose into high-level decision-making, few have used it in all aspects of their operations. So how do you believe, I guess, leadership and organizations can benefit and prioritize and integrate purpose into their core values and strategy? What obstacles are in the way as well?
It's a good question, and it's one we sort of think about an awful lot. It's probably worth just putting a bit of context around the concept of purpose and how that's sort of come about. So we found ourselves in a strange place. So we created our model back in 2012, and we were really looking for a way of sort of helping businesses to understand that they need something that really inspires and drives them and connects what they do to what the world needs. And back in the 80s, you probably didn't really need to think that hard about that. We hadn't got climate change. We hadn't got understanding of use of natural resources. We hadn't got diversity. There's a whole raft of things that every CEO will tell you they need to think about. And so we were trying to help businesses frame their why in the context of what businesses need. And we chose the word purpose. Then in 2017, I think it was, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, put in his annual CEO letter that he had sort of looked at the concept of purpose, thought it was very important for his companies to have a purpose. And purpose suddenly went from being a bit flim-flam, and suddenly it became, okay, well, he's not going to invest in my business, or BlackRock won't, unless I've got a purpose. And so they sort of insisted to all their CEOs, you get a purpose statement. Now, it's one thing to get a statement. It's another thing to make it active. The statement is about 1% of the task. To really make it active, you've got to put it into the business. And Mark Ritson has been very sort of critical, and rightly critical, I think, of a lot of businesses that have jumped on the bandwagon and don't really understand that if you're going to be purpose driven, there'll be moments of pain.
Yeah.
There's moments where you will go, okay, well, if I'm going to be true to my purpose, I might not be able to make my quarterly numbers. Which one do you do? Do you compromise on your purpose, or do you? Now, I've faced that moment several times in Brandpie, and every single time I've chosen to stay true to my purpose and sacrifice profit. Now, I'm the person who gets the pain, and I don't mind that. But if you're a shareholder and it's Unilever or Procter & Gamble, you're going to be a bit more critical, and you might not quite take the long-term view versus the short-term need. It creates a tension. For sure. And so, how you balance that tension in a publicly quoted business, particularly, I think is extraordinarily difficult. The way I sort of summarized the findings from this year's report was that you've got to take your purpose statement out the frame in the boardroom and make it real. And if you don't take it out the frame in the boardroom, it's just going to be lipstick on a gorilla. It's just going to sit there, and people will look at it and go, "You're not really purpose driven. You just jumped on a bandwagon." And so, from our point of view, you've really got to sort of put together an activation program. We do an activation workshop with leadership teams where we'll bring the leadership team together for a day and literally go around the planning framework and help them think through, okay, well, how are we going to embed this into our employee values and behaviors? How are we going to, what are we going to change? How are we going to embed this into our business strategy? How are we going to put it into our environmental programs, et cetera, et cetera. And so, by focusing on what actions are you going to take and looking at those and then starting to build those into your business strategy, you can genuinely make your people believe you are truly purpose driven. And our belief is that over time, you'll end up creating more shareholder value. And there's more and more sort of evidence coming along to support that. We're just doing a study with Griffiths University in Brisbane, where we've been working with their professor of sustainability. And we're looking at the performance of the quoted companies in the Australian 100, the FTSE 100, looking at those that have a purpose statement and just starting to track their shareholder performance over the longer term. And already it's starting to indicate that those businesses that are purpose driven seem to be producing greater shareholder return. And it looks like it's statistically, we'll publish that hopefully next year as it becomes factually more robust.
And how do you see, I guess, from that then, how do you envisage the concepts of purpose evolving over the next 5 to 10 years then as it keeps evolving and developing, specifically around sort of purpose-led marketing, etc.? How will that continue to develop in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, purpose-led marketing is interesting. So if you rewind back to the 70s, I think you really saw the advent of some businesses that were purpose-driven, and by becoming purpose-driven and using that in their external marketing, they attracted a consumer base that really aligned with the values that business had. And, whether it's Anita Roddick with The Body Shop, Patagonia, Tom's Shoes, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, you've got those businesses had a really strong core belief. And, they were trying to change something. And they put that into their external marketing. It wasn't a gimmick. The ingredients that they used were aligned with their values, the way they behaved as a company, the way they treated their employees. It's really easy to see how that and the sort of the bandwagon that sort of emerged over the last sort of 5 or 6 years could create, purpose-driven brands. And that's a phrase that I've sort of reacted quite violently against. You can't have a brand's purpose. Your business can have a purpose.
Yeah.
And the brand you build in the minds of your customers, shareholders, employees can be purpose-driven. I'm sort of with a few of the activist shareholders at Unilever that making every brand have a clear purpose. Do you really need a purpose for mayonnaise? It's pretty clear why mayonnaise exists. And it may be going a little bit too far. So it needs thought. And if you're going to build it into your marketing, it's got to be built into your business first. And if it's not built into your business first, don't put it in your marketing, because you'll be greenwashing, purpose washing, whatever people want to call that. And that's just going to be dangerous for your business.
Listen, final question. I mean, this has been brilliant. It's been great catching up with you. But final question, talk to me about what the future holds for Brandpie. What does success look like for you now? I mean, obviously, you've achieved so much, not only as an individual in your career, but obviously through Brandpie now. What does the future hold for the business and for you?
No, I've got to the sort of point where you start thinking about your legacy, which is something you do start to think about when you hit your sort of 60s. And the thing I get most satisfaction from in the business is watching people join Brandpie and grow. And I see so many people who've been affected, hurt, not sort of inspired in other companies where they've worked at. Our industry is notorious for if you're doing well, you hire. If you suddenly have a quiet period, you get rid of people, and you start to treat people in an inappropriate way. They just become numbers on paper, not human beings. And the thing I love about Brandpie is that everybody that's joined us has developed and grown, some faster than others. Some don't like the culture we've created. I talk a lot about a culture where you can shape and manage your own destiny. Some people don't like that. They like to just be told what to do. And that makes their life less stressful. Whereas if you're taking full responsibility for your career and you're taking full responsibility for the quality of work that you do, then you will have to think about every action you take, and then you have to own that. And that's the type of culture I'm trying to build. And I've got some this is probably the strongest team I've ever had the privilege of working with. And yeah, we built a great business. Yeah, we've been sort of flying the plane as we've been building it, or driving the car as we've been building it. And we've now got all the bits in the last sort of year or so. We've got all the bits in place to do a full purpose-driven transformation program. When you see the impact that has on a business, it's incredible. And every single CEO I've worked with over my career, they always say the end of a brand transformation program, a culture, now purpose transformation program. If I'd have known doing this would have such a great impact, I'd have done it every single company I'd have been at. I had no idea it would have this impact. And it releases so much human energy. And you then watch the clients you've sort of worked with and supported go on and produce more motivated employees, better returns for their shareholders. You just feel privileged to sort of have impacted in a little bit more. And we've just done a big program for SLB, formerly Schlumberger, and Olivier Lepouche, the CEO who we worked with. He popped me a note and just said, look, really want to thank the team at Brandpie. You've pushed us further than we would have gone. And, in my mind, SLB is one of the few technology businesses on the planet really could solve the climate crisis through the use of technology, decarbonisation, geothermal. They are such smart people, but they needed to be really pushed to sort of just be that little bit braver. And I think we did that, and they'll never look back. And it's just a privilege to have, somebody like that. You've helped a little bit, and you feel that by pushing them, they're going to be, more aggressive and more determined to use their technology to decarbonize the oil and gas industry, to create the new energy industries of the future, to decarbonize the atmosphere and find the technologies for that. And that, I think, is pretty cool.
Very cool. And what a way to finish. Dave, it's been brilliant talking to you today. Thank you for sharing not only your experience, but also the work that you've been doing with Brandpie. And I wish you and the business all the success going forward, as I'm sure it will come.
Thank you. Thanks, Nate. It's been a pleasure talking to you.